The first time Rylan Pace bled in front of the alien students, it wasn't part of any lesson plan. He had been helping the engineering interns lift a dense composite crate onto a lev sled inside the auxiliary cargo bay of the Arcadian Science Exchange, a floating academic platform tethered in low orbit above Ganymede. The crate slipped from its moorings and caught the back of his forearm on the way down. A jagged edge tore through the fabric of his work jacket and into skin, leaving a long, ugly gash. "Ah, crap," Rylan muttered, more annoyed than alarmed. Blood welled up instantly, running in thin rivulets down to his wrist. The moment it splattered onto the floor, Kexel, a third-year xenobiology student from the Lurian cluster, let out a high-pitched chirp of alarm and scrambled forward, arms flailing. "You are leaking," Kexel shouted, already pulling out a small Med XYL from his satchel. The tool glowed faintly purple. "I'm bleeding, yeah?" Rylan said, wincing as he pressed the cleanest part of his sleeve against the wound. "It's not deep, just messy." Kexel's 3 fingers trembled as he extended the Med XYL toward the gash. "Remain motionless, please. This is a Class 2 dermal breach. You require immediate stabilization." "Kex, wait," Rylan said, chuckling despite the sting. "This is nothing. I've had paper cuts that bled worse." The alien didn't appear amused. 2 more students, Veltra and Auric, rushed over, both carrying their own diagnostic tools. The trio surrounded Rylan like a triage squad dropped onto a battlefield. Veltra's tendrils twitched nervously. "Your vital fluid is escaping rapidly. You are pale. Alert the infirmary." "I'm always pale," Rylan said, trying to keep pressure on the wound. "Lack of sun. Comes with being born in Michigan." Auric was already speaking into his calm, voice sharp with urgency. "Human instructor has sustained trauma. Request emergency extraction." Rylan sighed and leaned back against the crate, letting the students panic in circles around him. "Guys, seriously, I appreciate the concern, but this isn't an emergency. It's a scrape." The crate beeped from the lev sled, reminding Rylan that the job wasn't even halfway done. He glanced down at his arm. Blood was still dripping, but slower now. The cut wasn't deep enough to warrant stitches, just a thorough cleaning and maybe a bandage. Kexel gently pushed Rylan's sleeve up to get a better look. "This level of fluid loss would be fatal to a Lurian. You are still alert." "How?" "Because humans bleed all the time," Rylan said. "You stub a toe wrong, you bleed. You shave too fast, you bleed. Hell, if you're clumsy in the kitchen, you might need a trip to urgent care." "Wait, you accept this?" Veltra asked. "You live in constant proximity to sharp instruments? We have entire TV shows dedicated to people getting hurt in ridiculous ways," Rylan said, grinning. "You ever seen a rodeo?" The students blinked in unison. "Remind me to show you some videos later." Still, the bleeding wasn't stopping fast enough. Rylan let Kexel disinfect the gash and apply a temporary biosealant. It stung like hell, and he hissed through his teeth. "All right," he admitted. "Maybe not nothing, but still not worth calling the infirmary over." Auric tilted his head. "Are all humans this durable?" "Well," Rylan said, pushing himself upright again, "not all. But most of us are pretty good at getting back up." He didn't mention the time he'd broken his wrist falling off a roof trying to hang Christmas lights. That had been less about durability and more about poor judgment. The crate was finally loaded, and the students hovered awkwardly as Rylan walked toward the med bay for a proper dressing. His steps were steady, but his arm throbbed like it had its own heartbeat. By the time he reached the infirmary, Kexel was still trailing him. "I said I'm okay," Rylan said, glancing back. "You said this is nothing," Kexel replied. "I am attempting to determine your scale of something." Rylan chuckled. "You'll learn. Humans have a sliding scale for pain. It's not always logical." Inside the med bay, the attending nurse, a tall, no-nonsense woman from Earth named Dr. Riva, took one look at his arm and sighed. "What did you do this time?" "Crate ambush," Rylan said, sitting down and letting her peel off the makeshift sealant. Students almost fainted. Riva cleaned the wound and applied a long dermal strip with practiced efficiency. "You'll be sore for a few days. Keep it clean. No heavy lifting. I'll leave the crates to the lev sleds." Kexel watched the entire procedure with the wide-eyed focus of someone witnessing a miracle. "You are fully functional again?" he asked once Riva was done. Functional enough, Rylan said, rotating his wrist. Now let's get back to class. 2 days later, the incident had become the basis of a lecture. Rylan stood in front of a projection screen showing pictures of first aid kits, tourniquets, antiseptics, and gauze. He wore a fresh bandage, which Kexel pointed at every few minutes as if it might start gushing again. Today we're talking about human emergency response, Rylan said. Because apparently me bleeding all over the cargo bay was the most educational thing I've done in weeks. Several students nodded solemnly. We're going to cover what happens to the human body during injury, how we treat it, and most importantly, how we stay calm. You laughed, Kexel said. You were bleeding and laughed. Rylan shrugged. Sometimes humor is how we deal with stress. The class practiced wrapping bandages on fake arms while Rylan walked around offering tips. When Veltra wrapped a compression bandage too tightly and the fake hand turned blue, Rylan gave her a thumbs up. Real humans don't change colors that fast, but good eye. Auric raised one of his 3 eyebrows. Does your species not fear physical damage? Oh, we do, Rylan replied. But we've been dealing with it for a long time. We're pretty good at surviving things that should probably kill us. He didn't say it with pride, just candor. He'd seen enough in his 36 years to know that humans were weirdly good at pushing through pain when they had to. Sometimes too good. After class, Kexel approached him again. If you had not stopped the bleeding, how long before incapacitation? Depends on where the cut is, Rylan said. Veins, arteries, depth, all that matters. This one? I probably had a couple hours before it got dangerous. Maybe less if it got infected. Kexel tilted his head. You calculated this while bleeding? You kind of have to. When nobody's immediately coming to help, you make do. Kexel looked away for a moment, then back. Your resilience is not what I expected. Trust me, Rylan said, neither is yours. You all panic when I bleed, but you can survive in vacuum for 30 seconds. That's nuts to me. The alien was quiet for a beat. Perhaps we still have much to learn about one another. No doubt, Rylan said, patting his bandaged arm. But next time I almost lose a limb, try not to call the emergency beacon. Just bring me a towel. But the towel wouldn't be enough next time. 3 weeks later, during a maintenance survey on the outer ring, one of the stabilizer nodes overloaded. Rylan had been checking the cable housing when it burst, sending a shard of metal through his thigh. He collapsed instantly, breath hissing through his teeth as pain flooded his senses. Blood spread rapidly under him as his vision swam. Kexel was the first to reach him, eyes wide, hands trembling. Rylan, I know, he gasped, clutching his leg. This one's not nothing. And for the first time, his voice wasn't joking. Rylan's breath caught in his throat as the pain carved a jagged path up his side. The shard was still lodged in his thigh, skewed at an angle that made his stomach twist just looking at it. He pressed both palms around the entry point, not daring to pull it free. Don't touch it, he managed, voice tight. Kexel dropped to his knees beside him, his usually steady hands hovering uselessly over Rylan's leg. You require surgical extraction. Immediate transport. You were losing vital volume. I can't determine if the femoral artery is compromised. Don't panic, Rylan said between clenched teeth. I'd be unconscious or worse if it was fully severed. It's bleeding but not spraying. That's a good sign. Veltra skidded into view, her outer limbs extending reflexively as she surveyed the scene. Containment foam is en route. Estimated arrival, for minutes. Too long, Rylan muttered. I need pressure. Kexel, your toolkit, does it have a compression ring? Kexel blinked, then scrambled for his satchel. Yes, two. I have 2. They are designed for appendages, not upper legs. Then adapt, Rylan said, teeth gritted. Strap one above the wound. Tight. I'll guide you. Veltra's voice dropped to a whisper. You are coordinating your own trauma response? Better than bleeding out, Rylan said, already pale. Hurry. Kexel fumbled with the ring, trying to adjust its diameter. His long fingers trembled more with each passing second. Rylan reached down with his free hand and grabbed Kexel's wrist. Look at me, he said. You've done field work. You've dissected live tissue. You've stabilized oxygen-starved organs in zero gravity. This is just anatomy. Don't overthink it. Kexel nodded once, then looped the ring around Rylan's upper thigh. With Rylan's guidance, he tightened it until the bleeding slowed to a sluggish ooze. That's it, Rylan said with a shaky exhale. Now stabilize the shard. Don't remove it. Just keep it from shifting. Veltra retrieved a spool of biocord from her utility belt and anchored the metal in place using a cross-strap technique that looked improvised but held firm. Rylan's head lolled back against the floor panel. Your heart rate is elevated beyond human norm, Kexel said. We need to sedate. No sedatives, Rylan said. Not until I'm in the med bay. I don't know how deep it went. If it nicked anything important, I need to stay conscious. The hallway lights above them flickered, signaling the approach of the emergency team. Rylan blinked hard, trying to stay focused. You're not used to this kind of emergency, are you? He asked them. Veltra looked at him. We study long-term trauma and slow-developing pathologies. Not puncture wounds with active hemorrhaging. Right? Well, welcome to my childhood. I grew up near a junkyard. You'd be amazed how many things can impale a person before lunch. A shadow fell across them as the med pod arrived. Two attendants in sterile suits stepped out, one carrying a sealed stretcher, the other prepping in 4-line. Vitals are borderline, one of them said. We'll stabilize in transit. They lifted Rylan carefully, legs braced to avoid jostling the shard. He bit back a groan as the angle shifted. Kexel followed alongside the stretcher, still clutching the empty compression ring in his hand like a talisman. Inside the med pod, Rylan's vision dimmed at the edges. The cabin lights seemed too bright. A cold pad met his back as he was laid out on the stretcher. You're going to need a transfusion, one of the medics said. Blood type? O negative, Rylan whispered. Universal donor. Lucky, the medic said, sliding a cannula into his arm. Not luck, Rylan murmured. Just genetics. He drifted in and out during the ride to the surgical bay. Each bump in the pod's trajectory sent a fresh jolt of agony through his leg. At one point he opened his eyes to find Kexel still beside him, silent and rigid. Why are you here? Rylan asked, his voice little more than a rasp. I did not wish to leave you unattended, Kexel said. Your resilience is formidable but not infinite. Rylan managed a faint grin. Thanks for the reminder. By the time they reached the bay, the surgical team was waiting. Riva stood at the center, arms crossed, already dressed in sterile scrubs. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded to the medics, who transferred Rylan to the operating platform. His grip tightened briefly on Kexel's wrist before they separated. Tell Veltra she did good work. I will, Kexel said. And you remain intact. Rylan snorted once, then blacked out as the anesthesia took hold. 17 hours later, Rylan woke up in post-op. His leg was immobilized in a suspended brace, the wound sealed and reinforced with layered mesh. A dull ache pulsed beneath the surface, but it was clean, pain-controlled, contained. His head felt fuzzy, like someone had vacuumed out all his thoughts and left only static. Riva stood at the foot of his bed, tapping a display panel. You'll walk again, she said without looking up. Eventually. You tore through the quadriceps and just grazed the femoral bundle. Millimeters from disaster. Congratulations. I always aim to impress, Rylan muttered. You'll need rehab. No climbing anything for at least 4 weeks. Define climbing. Anything above waist level. Damn. She handed him a hydration pack and stepped aside as the door opened. Kexel entered, followed by Auric and an unfamiliar student with a scaled crest running along her spine. Rylan blinked at them. What's this, a delegation? They insisted, Riva said, already moving toward the exit. Don't make it worse. Kexel approached first, placing a small box on the tray beside Rylan's bed. An offering. Rylan raised an eyebrow. You brought me a gift? Not a gift. A token of adaptation. I analyzed the incident and modified our emergency training protocols. He opened the box, revealing a compact injector with a red band around the barrel, contains a coagulant compatible with your biology. Synthesized from your blood sample 2 weeks ago. No more gauze improvisation. Rylan stared at the injector. You made me a custom blood clotting agent? Yes, Kexel said. And several backup units. I have distributed them among the advanced cohort. Auric stepped forward next. We have also revised our response hierarchy. Instructors are now classified as high vulnerability assets. You will be escorted during all external operations. The crested student spoke for the first time. And I will be auditing your movement clearance. You're reckless. Rylan blinked. You're not even in my department. I am now, she said. He leaned back against the pillow, exhaling slowly. You're forming a protective committee around me, aren't you? Correct, Kexel said. You named it something, didn't you? The Human Durability Oversight Cell. Rylan groaned. You made an acronym, didn't you? We did not, Oryx said. But now we will. Rylan closed his eyes. I should have stayed in cargo logistics. There was a pause. Then Kexel said, we were frightened. Rylan opened one eye. You did not exhibit fear, Kexel continued. But we did. Not because we doubted you, because we did not yet understand you. Rylan looked up at the ceiling. That's the thing about humans. We don't always make sense. Even to ourselves. Veltra's voice came from the doorway. But we're learning. She stepped in holding a mobility aid. This is yours. Custom fitted. Rylan groaned again. Please tell me it doesn't talk. It announces terrain hazards in 6 languages. Of course it does. They helped him sit up, slowly, carefully. His leg throbbed, but it held. The brace clicked as he shifted. You all really didn't have to do this, he said. We did, said Veltra. Because next time we want to understand what something means before it's nearly everything. Rylan's first serious attempt to walk again began with a threat, a bribe, and a bet all from aliens. It had been 11 days since the surgery, and the stiffness in his leg had settled into something dull and persistent, like a roommate who refused to leave but had stopped throwing parties. He sat on the edge of the recovery bay's hydrostatic bed, adjusting the brace while Veltra adjusted the room's gravity down by 10%. You planning to shave off my weight until I float out the door? Rylan asked, flexing his toes. Only enough to reintroduce standing pressure gradually, Veltra replied. You humans insist on compressible tissue. It's very inefficient. Inefficient? You're made of jelly strands and optimism. Jelly strands don't rupture under kinetic stress. You, on the other hand, needed 64 microstitches. I was impaled, Rylan said, exasperated. I didn't jam a fork in my leg for fun. Kexel stepped in with a mobility scanner, its display flickering with limb diagnostics. He said nothing at first, just watched the readings shift while Rylan shifted uncomfortably. You've been avoiding weight-bearing motion, Kexel finally said. I've been avoiding collapsing like a scarecrow. You must attempt now. The longer you hesitate, the less responsive the tissue becomes. Yeah, I know muscle atrophy. I read the chart. Kexel narrowed his eyes, or the Lurian equivalent, a subtle closing of the lower lid. Then why wait? Because I'm not in the mood to fall in front of a crowd. There is no crowd. Only us. Exactly. If I fall, I'll never hear the end of it. Veltra handed him the mobility aid. If you walk unassisted within 20 strides, I will deactivate the vocal hazard alerts. Rylan raised an eyebrow. And, she added, Kexel will stop reciting statistical mortality rates during meals. You do, she said. Rylan sighed and looked at the aide, then at the hallway beyond. 20 strides, huh? What do I get if I make it 30? You get to keep your pride. That's not worth much on this station. Still, he pushed himself upright, both hands gripping the aide. His leg trembled as it straightened, the brace redistributing the load with a soft hum. The first step was more of a shuffle. The second, a slide. But by the fourth, his heel actually lifted. Kexel watched the readings, occasionally adjusting the scanner's angle. Veltra tracked his stride count aloud, her tone dry but encouraging. At stride 12, Rylan winced and paused. The tendon along his thigh spasmed. You may rest, Kexel said quickly. Rylan shook his head. If I stop now, I won't start again tonight. He pushed forward. 13. 14. The floor panels blurred slightly as sweat gathered behind his neck. 17. 18. At 19, the aide slipped slightly. His right foot caught the edge of a panel seam. Reflexes kicked in. He bent instinctively to compensate, pain flaring up his leg. Kexel moved to catch him, but Rylan waved him off and corrected his balance with a sharp exhale. 20, Veltra said. He didn't stop. 21. 22. Each step was a negotiation between will and physics. By 28, his shirt clung to him. At 30, he leaned heavily on the aid and finally stopped. I hate how smug you're being without even saying anything, he said between breaths. I am currently logging a report, Kexil replied. No smugness. Just data. Veltra deactivated the aid's vocal functions. You earned it. The walk back was slower but steadier. No faltering. Just a quiet kind of exhaustion that settled into him like sand in a boot. That night, he slept without a stimulant patch for the first time since surgery. 3 days later, the brace came off. Riva signed off on his discharge with a nod and a warning. No jumping. No running. No lifting anyone, including yourself, hero style. I make no promises, Rylan replied. She handed him a clearance slip and returned to her console without ceremony. Kexel waited outside the medbay doors. You are officially ambulatory, he said. We are resuming instruction. Today? Now. Rylan groaned. They took the lift to Deck 6 where the xenomedical class had been relocated to accommodate his convalescence. The students stood in a half circle, most of them holding notepads or datapads. A few still glanced at his leg, despite the absence of the brace. He stepped up to the center and looked around. All right, he said. Forget what you thought you knew about the circulatory system. We're going to talk about what happens when it goes wrong again. Veltra raised a tentacle. We already studied hemorrhagic shock. Yeah, but today we're going to simulate it. On me. There was a collective intake of breath. Not real bleeding, he added quickly. Relax. We're using a pressure suit with artificial wound modules. You'll diagnose and treat based on external signs only. No scanners. No med XYLS. No panicking. Kexel handed him the suit components. Rylan began suiting up, his movements slow but practiced. You're testing our response time, Veltra said. I'm testing your instincts, Rylan corrected. Because one day, someone will go down where scanners aren't working, and you'll wish you'd learned how to spot signs the old-fashioned way. The first simulation began with a simulated puncture above the ankle. The students rotated in pairs, applying compression, checking vitals, and hesitating far too long. Too slow, Rylan said. I would have passed out. You were still speaking, one student said. Barely. You can't wait for collapse to act. Second scenario. The next wound simulated a deep abdominal laceration. Veltra pressed a cloth to the site and immediately began coordinating fluid replacement with a hypopack. Kexel stabilized the lower spine without prompting. Better, Rylan said. Still slow, but better. After 4 rounds, Rylan sat down to rest. His leg throbbed gently, a reminder that he wasn't fully healed. But he watched the students repeat the scenarios without him, each group faster than the last. Auric approached with a datapad. We've calculated the average response improvement since your injury. 43%. Not bad, Rylan said. But I'm aiming for 60. You believe we will need this level of readiness? I hope not, Rylan said. But accidents don't check your syllabus. Later, as the students filed out, Rylan remained behind, packing up the simulation modules. Veltra lingered by the door. You were reckless that day, she said. The stabilizer node fault wasn't your responsibility. It was on my checklist, Rylan replied. Didn't want to make it someone else's problem. You could have died. Yeah, he said, sliding the last module into its case. But I didn't. Veltra didn't respond immediately. Most species don't teach through self-endangerment, she said after a while. Most species don't have our luck, Rylan said, or our stubbornness. She watched him for a moment longer, then nodded and left. Alone, Rylan sat down again and rubbed his thigh. The scar beneath the fabric itched faintly. He'd walk without pain again, eventually. But for now he was upright, functional, and surrounded by students who might one day save a life because of a mistake he survived. That was enough.